This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into episode 202 here in the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon alongside Noah Grant, and for another week, nothing but pure pain and sadness. We'll talk about that.
Feels like we're Duluth Bulldogs fans for a minute, but
well, they did finish.
Oh wait, did I give away the game? Crap, that's who they played. Okay,
yeah. Well, funny enough, that's a team that finished 7th in the NCHC. That's the good news because two very not intelligent people predicted that at the beginning of the season. They also said that a team by the name of St. Cloud was going to be in 2nd in the NCHC. And you know what? That pick was not a bad one. Very much within reach, especially this weekend against the number 7 Duluth Bulldogs. And we'll talk about it. Not the death blow in the pairwise that we thought it was going to be, but definitely puts St. Cloud in a similar scenario to what we thought might happen should this happen. We joked about St. Cloud being in a position where they only had to get at least a point to stay where they are, which is 3rd in the NCHC. And we jokingly said, if that's ever the case, that's just a sad day and we don't want to talk about it. Well, boy, we were 1 point away from talking about it. And we are going to talk about it. So on the flip side of things, women's hockey will take a look at their field in the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, our St. Cloud State Huskies, as we feared and likely assumed, did not make that tournament. They are done for the year, finishing 17-17-2 on the season. Congrats to the Wisconsin Badgers, who did win the WCHA championship grouping last weekend. Should be an interesting tournament, to say the least. Nick, with all that being said, anything positive that you have for us this week? I know who I'm asking about this, so I...
well, define positive, right? I think if there's any shred of positivity on we'll start with the men's side, right? Is that, as you mentioned, it isn't a death blow, but you are hanging by a thread, literally a thread. So they're still technically, I think they're tied for 16th when we look at the pairwise. Now, of course, I can hear it already. I'm sure Caleb Peabody is going, but Nick, the cut line. Yes, we're aware of the cut line. So Noah, the other positive thing and going to the women's side is, despite not making the NCAA tournament, there was a chance Stonehill on the women's side, actually a conference championship win. Essentially, I think that was the knockout blow for the women's team to not unfortunately make the dance. But still back-to-back season, 17 wins, had 18 last year. It's disappointing to a sense, Noah, that the second half was not as quite as good as the first half. They just, again, injuries, we talked about it last week, just kind of stalled it. But overall, St. Cloud State women's hockey is still trending in the right direction. Yep. I still feel like that organization is going to be still active in the transfer portal. I'm curious to see what the goaltending situation is. And honestly, well, that's the positive thing. Sonia Hola, a WCHA goaltender of the year, highly deserved, and congratulations to her on that honor. So we cannot go through this episode of the podcast and not mention Sonia Hole and what a year she had between the pipes.
Yeah, certainly impressive. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's just something that I think with St. Cloud in years past obviously has been a really strong suit for them. And you think about, especially the first half of the year, I mean, Brian Idalski was a shoo-in for like WCHA Coach of the Year, just with how good the Huskies were playing. And part of that was off of the backs of the net mining crew. And the fact that essentially your backup goaltender, quote unquote, has close to a 2.0 GAA or underneath. And like, that's your quote unquote 1B. So to speak, right. You know, when you're talking about goaltending tandem, I mean, that was definitely not the issue for the women's team heading down the stretch in the second half, Nick. I think that's fair to be said.
Yeah, we talked about that last week, right? It was they didn't have the complementary offense to support the defense, right? A lot of low scoring games, a lot of 1-goal games too, Noah, as we talked about just about 7 days ago. Probably made it more disappointing, the fact that, you know, and again, you know, we're not that far out, Noah, from where the women's hockey fans were looking at the schedule certain weekends, and it was sort of, okay, what's this going to look like in terms of the spread? Yeah. And the last couple of seasons, you know, it's been, damn, we were that close to pulling off one, if not two wins, you know, so the frustration's still there, but it's different. And because this team again has taken some big strides forward, again, we can't forget how far this team has gone, but that is their last horizon right now, and that's to get the complementary offense, getting the puck in the back of the net. That is the next step for this team. They did take strides this year again. Year one of Rydalski, it was a defensive front type system, you know, try to capitalize on turnovers and use the transition game. This year, they were pushing the pace. They played right with the top guns in the WCHA. They got wins against Ohio State, Duluth. You know, they ended long winless streaks. So again, there's still a lot of things positive to talk about with this women's squad. It's just unfortunate that, again, that second half, a very brutal WCHA schedule, just ended up having the win-loss record that it had.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I was just trying to do some quick math, like I always do. Also, a dangerous proposition, as we've clearly talked about. So between the men's and women's teams, respectively, second half of the season. So we are talking. I did not include the men's team playing after the holiday break against Bemidji. So I started truly in January for both of these squads. 12-22, Nick. Yeah, not great. You know, if you're looking on the men's side, of course, only a pair of shootout wins, and then you've got 3 regulation losses and a shootout loss in January. They won 4 in February, lost 2 as well, and then since they hit March, they've lost 4 straight. Yikes. And of course, 2 of those wins in the middle of that came against Miami. So yeah, not exactly the season I think either club was looking for. And we'll dive deeper into the women's team again as we kind of evolve over the coming weeks. As we've talked about, NCAA field is set as of today of recording on Sunday, March 10th. So we'll talk about that as always. But we start on the men's side with Center Ice View News and Notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Episode 202, Nick Max and Noah Grant here in the den, and yeah, the title says it all. Pretty much must-win weekends from here on out for the men's hockey team, to say the least. We talked about the pairwise quite a bit because apparently that's something that's very important as we pay attention this time of year, from what I've been told. So yeah, why don't we actually just take a quick little glance here? Again, as we talked about, not the death blow that we thought we were going to be above Western Michigan. Omaha and Colorado College are also in there, which I think is really intriguing if you think about it, where you have essentially Western, Omaha, and CC, who are all below the Huskies in the NCHC standings in that position. St. Cloud technically tied for 15. They lose the tiebreaker, so they are at 16 if you want to be technical. They are below the cut line. You know, as far as the auto bids are concerned. So, although The field this year is looking a little bit interesting where some weaker conferences are really weak on top of that. But if you're the Huskies, the good news is, at least to start, your first round opponent is at 13. They are 3 slots ahead of you. I don't know if that's going to be enough, but a sweep of said Western Michigan certainly would not hurt you. I would think that it would maybe at least push you to 14. Maybe. Which I still don't think is good enough. The total caveat to this, Nick, as we've kind of mentioned, regardless, they've got to win this weekend. The men's hockey team for... I would say for the first time, maybe really in show history, because we never really had this because of the COVID year, this is probably the first time in show history where this weekend has already been a must-win weekend on the men's side. We've never really been in this position.
Correct, and neither has Brett Larson. This would be the first time under Brett Larson era that essentially they not only were you in must-win territory, but it was say they don't get out this weekend. The first time they would fail to make the NCAA tournament under his watch, and so let's just say this, Noah. It is. Do or die, for lack of a better phrase for us. This team has shown in years past that they play well with their backs against the wall. This team, though, I know we mentioned the record and the second half. It has not been pretty. You wonder where the confidence level is. The other side of it is you probably, despite what was a save by Cameron Rowe, probably should have had 4 wins against Western Michigan throughout the regular season. So you have played this team well. Again, best of 3. You're at home ice, so that does help. So you're not traveling to Lawson, which would have been a very, very tough assignment. But no, I want to ask you this. We were talking pre-show about this weekend for sure, but is it enough? And I mentioned I think they have to get to the NCHC championship game to feel more comfortable about their chances. Now, granted, they win it, they don't have to worry about it. It's an auto bid, right? But I think you have to at least get to that point. Do you feel like they have to get that far to get at least an at-large bid, or do you think that if they get to the NCHC quarterfinals in St. Paul, that they would be sitting in a decent enough spot to get an at-large bid from the NCAA committee?
Well, the cop-out answer is it depends on what the rest of the field does, right? You're in a very similar position to where the women were at, where you're stuck pairwise watching, and you're hoping that you don't have more Stonehills, quote unquote. You're hoping that you don't have more conference tournaments that go crazy. ECAC could be anybody's guess. If it's not Quinnipiac, boom, you've got a second team in the ECAC that's in. Obviously, the CCHA is a little bit down this year. You're going to get the auto bid from Atlantic Hockey, but other than that, if you get Big Ten, which I guess still could be anybody's guess if you really want to be technical about it. Hockey East, a lot of favorites there, but still could have an interesting mix. You've got a lot of teams in that 10 to 20 range that are coming from Hockey East as well, too, that make things crazy. And we've seen the NCHC this year. So I certainly think, and the obvious answer is getting to the championship game would not hurt them, because no matter who they play, unless Duluth does Duluth things, and even if Duluth does Duluth things, it would you got to win that game for sure. Then, I don't want to say must win to need to get to the championship game, but I would be about 75% confident that would be something that might almost be necessary. Moot point if they don't get the job done this weekend. Ironically enough, the last time, as we mentioned, the Huskies were in this position where they were, I don't want to say the underdog, but not exactly favored, so to speak, getting out of the first round, essentially, was back when the COVID year hit. They were actually ready to head to, guess where? Kalamazoo on the flip side, to face Western Michigan back in 2020. Now, the Huskies have been in this position before and went the other direction, where they've been an auto bid and they dropped that first round series against a very hungry Duluth team on the backside who made things interesting down the stretch. So not to say it can't be done. The Huskies 6-10 coming out of the holiday break past Bemidji State, 8-10 if you want to be technical, throwing in those 2 games, 5 regulation wins to their credit, and then they obviously had no, that's not right. that would be 4, and then 2 that they would have ended up winning in a shootout. They had a shootout loss as well early. Below 500 certainly. 4-game losing streak down the stretch does not help. They've largely beaten the opponents besides this weekend that should have been beaten, namely Miami. They didn't, falter like they have in years past. Now, when we go back, certainly we've had a couple of years where they have faltered against Miami. They have struggled against Omaha when they're in the number 7 spot. Omaha was actually kind of the start of all this, if you want to be really technical about it. That last game of the tail end of the first half of the season, and Omaha was pretty much dead to rights about a month ago. And has suddenly put themselves in 5th place, and that first round matchup against CC should be very interesting.
That should be a very good series.
Yeah, very excited for that one. 2 teams on the bubble trying to kind of stave off. And that's a series where I don't think the other team gets hurt by that. They're right next to each other at 11 and 12 in the pairwise. I don't think either team really does not benefit from that. So there could still be a lot of movement here. The question is, yes, you've beaten a team 3/almost 4 times this year, Nick. Is St. Cloud good enough to do it again when the pressure is on? If there's ever been any criticism for a Brett Larson team not in 2021, it's that their teams, when it comes to crunch time, when it comes down to it, and obviously only one team wins the national championship, but more often than not, when they need the extra bounce, even in a year where they've been a little bit better than this year, they have not got it done. Does the situation get worse this upcoming weekend? Or does it almost get better because you realize that this team is not your team of yesteryear this season? Is the pressure, in a weird way, off a little bit, and history kind of goes by the wayside and the focus just becomes Friday night?
It's a fantastic question. I think there's 2 lenses you can look at this, right, Noah? And that's one from the player's perspective. There's those who, like your Zach Okapis, your Kyler Koopas, your VD Miet, and that were part of the 2020 team, right, in the pod down in Omaha, and they've been through the gamut, right? They've been in situations where if they needed to create something, they've gotten the job done for the most part. But again, the difference between, and I love the comparison with the 2020 team, because unfortunately they're going in the opposite directions. The team in 2020 was actually on the rise. I mean, they struggled early. They really hadn't put a bunch together. They didn't string away wins that we hoped they would. And then towards that second half, that's when they really found traction. Yep. They were a team that was kind of that sleeper team that was almost like the Omaha of this year, right? Noah, what is, okay, we maybe aren't the flashiest team, but we're kind of greedy. We get things done, and we play a hard-nosed type game, and this is not a team that anybody in the NCHC wants to face. I think St. Cloud State this season, unfortunately, has had some issues with goaltending. I think defensively, they haven't been as staunch in front of their own net. Offensively, I think they've been all right, to be honest with you. But again, it starts in the back end. And again, for Brett Larson, who puts pride in defense first hockey, and that's where everything starts, it has been a game of, can we shoot ourselves in the foot less this game than the previous game? And that, to me, that's what it comes down to is, how do the players approach this, knowing that they're on a 4-game slide? Because pressure can be a good thing, right? No, it can be a good thing for an athlete. It can make you focus. The opposite end of that is it could get you nervous. You could grip the stick a little too tight, and then you start worrying about the small things and maybe overthinking the game a bit instead of playing loose and maybe having fun while you're doing so. It's going to be interesting. If you want me to be the objectionable third party, I'm a bit worried this weekend. I really am, just because of the trajectory of this team. And like I said, I think it's just, again, it's not like the women's team where they're not able to put the puck in the back of the net. They have, but I just also feel like with some of the struggles they've had in the back end, that does open the door a bit for some things where even if, again, St. Cloud had leads, they weren't able to hold them. That's my biggest fear. So it's going to be close, but I'm not as confident as I have been in years past.
No, I'm not either. The one thing that you can really thank Huskies fans for, though, from Huskies fans, is the fact that you got to tip your hat to a team like Denver, who actually put the nail in the coffin for you last Saturday. Besides Miami, I think Western Michigan is the best matchup this St. Cloud team could have, struggling as mightily as they are going into this playoff grouping. If not, they were slated to have Omaha, who has kind of had the Huskies number this season, albeit with a lot of other teams. I know that North Dakota has obviously won the Penrose, but Omaha had a great showing again this weekend, too, and showed that, the Fighting Hawks are human-ish, so to speak. We'll find out this week, of course. I still think that Miami team can push that series to 3 games. I'm holding out for that. But beyond that, how did we honestly get here? Why don't we honestly start there? This is a WCHA slate, so we're not going to talk about that. But women's hockey, yeah, we're going to talk about that too. So on the men's side here, Miami, the aforementioned, did have Western Michigan. 3-2 was the final on Friday. On Saturday, they matched up again 6-1. The Broncos put everything kind of to rest and put themselves in the spot that they are in 6th place. We'll talk about Duluth St. Cloud in just a moment. Omaha 3-2 the first night over North Dakota, 4-1 the second night. So again, I believe only the third time, does that sound right? Maybe fourth that North Dakota's been swept this season, and technically the first one against CC were both overtime finishes, but the Tigers, they did it again, very much so in regulation. The Tigers do win on the first night 4-3 against Denver. They made things really interesting from a Huskies perspective, and then Denver, same score on the second night, game winner late in regulation, and that hockey game was 3-3 down the stretch at the tail end of period number 3. The Tigers team is almost unbeatable, by the way, I would say, in their home building, which is where they're going to be. They've certainly been very good. And where does that leave us? Well, why don't we take a look at the NCHC standings here. Nick, our final grouping for the regular season, North Dakota atop the pack, 49 points for them. They did not move after the weekend. Denver, really the best result the Huskies could actually probably hope for. If you were talking about a team that could have capitalized to move into that second spot, this weekend, certainly the door was open. But nonetheless, Denver at 45, the Huskies right behind at 41. They win the tiebreaker against the CC Tigers, also at 41, due to the second tiebreaker in the list, which is regulation wins. So although you look at CC through this graphic and you're like, wait a minute, they've got more conference wins, they've got more overall wins, how the heck are they not ahead of St. Cloud? Well, a lot of those wins for CC, as you can see, 5 overtime wins, 2 overtime losses, a lot of extra session finishes, which shows CC's been in close hockey games, but they've needed the extra session to do it. So the only saving grace for the Huskies. Omaha right behind at 40. How about that? We talked about how they were in 7th about a month and a half ago. Suddenly have had the late surge that we expected. Western Michigan at 37 points. Duluth in 7th. Yeah, I said that again. Duluth in 7th at 28 points, and then Miami at 7. Now, the thing that I think is wild to think about is essentially 3 through 6, Nick, only separated by 4 points, and then Denver 4 points shy of that for second place as well. So for as bad of a second half as St. Cloud really had, it took a while for everybody else to get in the mix, essentially, in these standings here. But nonetheless, all that means, Nick, is that the field is set. We will talk about the first round bracket in the NCHC in just a moment. Anything you want to kind of take away from that, Nick, before we recap last weekend and tell the folks how we got here in the first place?
Not so much, other than the fact that that Denver CC series was unbelievable.
Very
hockey.
good.
It really was. That gold pan matchup, which I know we've talked, we should be getting paid for the advertisements we have for CC, honestly. But no, honestly, and the reason why we're high on them, right? Look what they have. Similar to what Adalski's done with the women's side, what Chris Mayotte has done with CC, and just how that team is very similar, right? A very trap type system under Mike Havland. He comes in, again, part of the U.S. development team, was an assistant coach at Michigan. They're now playing more of a pro style hockey. The recruiting is so much better. That is a fun team to watch. And look all the way down to essentially 6, right? The NCHC is 6 teams deep. It was, a lot of movements. Couple years back, no one, right? It was a top 4 or 5, and it was a pretty lengthy gap between 6, 7, and 8. So this year, although Huskies fans, probably shall we say, holding their breath at times throughout the season after some unfortunate results. I think you, as a hockey fan, have to tip your cap to how good of a season it has been as a fan for this conference. So at the end of it, again, just unbelievable job by those two. And then for St. Cloud, really buoyed by their first half, right? And I think that will segue into how we got here is, after a really poor start in the non-conference, Noah, they turned it on, and well, that's about it. It lasted about half a season.
Yeah, someone definitely found the circuit breaker at halftime, quote unquote.
Right.
But, and that's the thing that really bites. If you're the Huskies, it was really the start. If your non-conference schedule, if they would have went 6-2 out of the gate, I think we're talking 10 or 11 in the pairwise. I think they're good enough to just sneak in right now. They're probably where the Tigers in Omaha are right now. So, but that's just not the case. That's not the hand they've been dealt. Certainly, the other thing that you kind of mentioned, too, in years past, you could maybe pick a team or 2 or 3 that you might be able to write off, or at least tag 3 or 4 on the season that you're able to get victories in. The NCHC has just been highly competitive across the board in terms of parity this year as well. So it has not been a comfortable year in general. Certainly has given us a lot to talk about, though. There's no doubt about that. As we look at Friday night, this was a game, unfortunately, the final score for this one, 6-5 in favor of the Bulldogs. The Huskies kind of ran this one down their leg a little bit at the end here, unfortunately. Crowd of just over 5,000. Huskies outshoot the Bulldogs 38-30 in this one, 18-7 in the first. Again, we talked about it. The theme of good starts has continued for the Huskies. Not a bad place to begin if you're entering the playoff realm, but you got to finish the job. Outshot 8-5 in the second, and then 13-11 in the third, and then 4-2 the Huskies outshoot the Bulldogs in overtime, but it was not enough. Special teams galore here. 2 for 3 on the power play were the Huskies. Duluth 1 for 3 on their opportunities as well. St. Cloud 40 face-off wins, 21 losses. Everything statistically in the first half of this game pointed to a better result for St. Cloud. You kind of felt, okay, they're in control. They're starting to kind of push away a little bit here. I think it was, I want to say 4-2 at one point here in this one.
And in the third, yep.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, yikes. And again, not typical of what we've seen from Brett Larson's teams. If anything, they've been either red hot enough that they've sustained through games, or they've been kind of slow to warm and they've finished games strong. We really haven't seen this where they've been good to start games, don't get a ton of production necessarily, and then they don't finish strong either. But as you mentioned, Huskies up 2-1 after the first, and then up 4-2 after the second before Duluth stormed back. So let's take a look at the scoring here. The Huskies open up the scoring. Mason Salquist, his 6th of the season from Grant Ashawn. And then Kyle Bettens of Duluth answered 2.5 minutes later before a power play goal at the tail end of period number 1. 39 seconds remaining. Dylan Anhorn found Vieti Miettinen for his 16th on special teams. And then Duluth tied this hockey game up. Some guy by the name of Ben Steves, who's having a very good year. It was not on the power play, but you just wait in this one. And then that was only 48 seconds into the second. 8 minutes later, Tyson Gross from Mason Reiners and Carl Folk made it a multi-goal spread again. And then a power play marker, Kyler Kupka, his 14th of the season, Tyson Gross, Vieti Miettinen 3 minutes later. And you kind of felt at that point, you're like, all right, similar to the Western Michigan game a couple Fridays ago, you're like, okay, the Huskies are doing what they have to do. They're in a position to win a hockey game, which I think is the important piece. Is the Huskies have at least put themselves in recent weeks in some of these games in the driver's seat. They've given themselves a chance to win hockey games. But since that point, it was all downhill. A lot of lapses in defensive coverage. Aaron Pionk at the 5:30 mark makes it a 1-goal contest. Vieti Miettinen scores again, his 17th of the season from his brother Werner. Halfway through the period, the Huskies still maintain that 2-goal lead. And then at the 13:58 mark and then 17:12 mark was Luke Lohheit for the game tire with just under 3 minutes remaining. And then with 8 seconds left in overtime, Quinn Olson, Aaron Pionk finding Ben Steves for his 2nd of the contest, 24th of the season on the power play. And just like that, the Huskies drop the first night in this one, Nick. And this is one where we talked about how it was so essential for the Huskies to get out of that first night on Friday with a victory. I would even have taken an overtime victory with the fact that the collapse was somewhat monumental in period number 3. but it just didn't happen. And that just puts you in such a more uncomfortable position for the second night against a team that is lower than you in the pairwise. I think the Dogs are like 24, 23, something like that. But yeah, Nick, we're almost at a loss for words a little bit, even though that we've seen some of these swoons in the second half. It's not like St. Cloud, I feel like when they've struggled in years past, have really just kind of been uncompetitive throughout. I loved your analogy in the beginning is, how can we shoot ourselves in the foot this time? And again, Friday night was another case of you looked at the box score entering period number 3 and you're like there's no way they don't win this hockey game. There's no way they don't finish this one in regulation. Well, they sure as heck didn't.
Yep. They sure as heck did. And then again, power play specialist Ben Stees is the one that wins it in overtime. When he shoots the puck, there's a pretty good chance it hits the back of the net. He's just that talented, despite, kind of a down year by his standards. But again, the year that UMD is having, not really surprised that everybody's stats have come down a bit. But yeah, no, it's when you're searching for answers, right? When you're searching for the whys, and even for us too, when we've played the game and we've covered this team for so long, and it's when you can't really highlight a single play, when you watch back film, you can't identify maybe, one person that's, maybe going to the wrong area of the ice. It just seems like a systematic team effort where they just can't get out of their own way, right? It does sort of just make you scratch your head a bit. And I think that's where Huskies fans are kind of at right now, as they're scratching the head going, we see what they're capable of. Again, a 4-2 lead going into the third period. Bulldogs, despite that though, and we've talked about this last week, Noah, the 2 games earlier, UMD in that second game, again, it was, I think, a 6-5 finish for the Huskies that came out on top in the earlier weekend series against these 2 squads. But at that point, UMD had a lead in that game too. They did not go away. So the fact that, they, despite where they're at in the season, they haven't, shall we say, rolled over going down 2 in their own barn. They're still fighting for whatever, playoff hopes that they have, knowing that really their only ticket in would be to win the NCHC conference championship coming up here in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, it's puzzling, right? It really is puzzling, especially when a 2-goal lead in the third. I mean, this was a situation almost every year, Noah, that this is like, okay, we've got this, we're going to lock it down. We'll play in the opposite end. We'll forecheck, we'll puck possess. We're going to make smart puck management decisions, I should say. Try and saying that 3 times fast. But, I don't feel like, for whatever reason, the Huskies are just managing the puck as well as they have in years past. And again, we've talked about goaltending. I'm not going to pick on one or the other, but it also feels like they're not getting that one save to maybe slow things down a little bit, maybe when they need to. So you put it all together. It's a puzzle that unfortunately paints troubled waters ahead. But the thing is that if you've got the right, captain of the ship, you can steer yourself out of it. I think my question is, how much damage does the ship have? And, we're taking on water. There's no question about it, but can we get at least to the shore to give ourselves another chance? And we'll have our answer here in probably about 6 or 7 days, unfortunately.
Yeah, Dominic Bassi, as you mentioned, stopping 24 of 30, and former Minot Minotauro Zach Sandy with 33 saves in this one. Now, here's one thing that I really want to point out here, and we're talking about the Huskies' woes a little bit here. This is a stat line that I think is really interesting. We talked about Vietti Miettinen, 2 goals, 1 assist, had 3 points, albeit a couple power play points that don't add to this marker. 6 shots on goal, -4. In this one, Nick. And that's where we kind of go back to, at some point you just got to make it happen. I know that sounds dumb. St. Cloud here on Saturday, they lose 4-2, Nick. And you look at that box score, attendance of just under 5,500, by the way. You look at that box score and you think, okay, maybe, Duluth tags on an empty netter. The Huskies are in a close one. They, both teams kind of kick it back and forth, similar pace of play. 54-27. are the shots in this one, Nick. 13-12 in the first, 22-11 in the second. The period that has historically been the Huskies' probably worst of the season. Although the third period is starting to take that cake. 19-4 in period number 3, and St. Cloud just like like I said, we're almost at a loss. The Huskies go 1 for 3 on the power play. Duluth scores on their only power play opportunity. So the PK is not doing their job either right now. 33 faceoff wins, 31 faceoff losses. Scoring didn't get started until the second. Duluth got on the board with a pair. And you thought entering period number 3, St. Cloud would be down 2-0. They responded actually fairly well. Power play goal from Tyson Gross, his 5th of the year. Dylan Anhorn, Adam Ingram at the 18:51 mark. And then 30 seconds later, even strength Vietti Mietten and Jack Peart finding Zach Okabe for his 10th of the season. And you think, okay, this is the pushback we're talking about. St. Cloud kind of pouring on the offense a little bit. The Huskies, power play goal given up in period number 3, and then an empty netter for Luke Lohheit with a second remaining to kind of seal the deal. So essentially a 1-goal hockey game. But you take away the empty net shot, 1 goal on 3 opportunities, albeit on the power play, Nick.
Yeah.
When you get down into crunch time, that just can't happen. And now credit, Duluth goaltending, 52 saves on 54 shots. Certainly that we've seen this before if you're a Huskies fan playing the Bulldogs. Isaac Posh was not bad, in this one by any means, 23 saves on 26. But Nick, it's just almost at a loss for words of, what more can you do? You put up almost a shot a minute in this hockey game. You lose essentially a 1-goal contest, and a lot of it comes down to why the PK has looked so poor as of late. But even at 5-on-5, just so many breakdowns in defensive coverage. It's if they're overcommitting up top, teams are finding a way towards the crease and able to bang home second chance opportunities. Then the Huskies collapse towards their net. They leave that secondary flow area in between the points and the front of the crease up near the top of the circles open, and guys are making plays up there. It's like defensive assignments are just burning the Huskies, and they build traction. They get really great offensive stretches. They start to put shots on net, albeit even if they're not grade A high danger, they have offensive possession. They're in the right zone. They're maybe doing the right things. And then someone takes a penalty. The PK suddenly can't hold the dam, so to speak. Or defensively, it's just blown coverage. And I'm at a loss of, we talked about St. Cloud probably being in a position where they're not going to fix a lot of things. They're going to have to be better at masking their deficiencies. Right now, the offensive supplementation has not been enough. Defensively,
it's scary.
Yeah, defensively, they're just missing. I don't want to say an extra gear. They're like missing a whole cylinder. And
well, we've talked about this, right? With the losses, especially in size in the back end last year, you do wonder in playoff hockey, right? And if you really want to put Huskies fans at 30 seconds to midnight, according to the nuclear countdown, right? You don't really have that gritty defensive third pairing that I think you would really want coming down the stretch for this type of run, right? Granted, we've talked about guys like Brendan Bushy in years past, John Lazat. Maybe not the best skaters. Yeah, they're not going to lead a rush, on their stick. They're not going to blow past, guys in the first layer of the forecheck. But they were tough to play against, and more so when you talk about goaltending deficiencies. One thing that when you play the game enough, you look back and say, is he seeing the puck? Is there traffic in front of him? Right? You put it all together. The Huskies, I think, I hate to say it, but I think they're just a bit undersized in the back end, and I think that's really caught up to them a bit here. Because mind you, undersized, I'm not saying you need to put a guy in his back all the time, but you need to be tough in terms of protecting the area around the net. You got to allow the goaltender to see the shots coming in. And even more so, you got to be able to win the physical battles. Say Posh or Bassey gives up a little bit of a rebound. You got to be able to win those battles and get the puck at least to the walls, the corner, chip it out, whatever the hell you say it. The Huskies aren't doing that, right? And that's the troublesome thing. Like you said, the offensive supplementation, you say it's not enough. I'm not sure how much more they need if you're getting 5 and you're giving up 6, right? That's not the issue.
And that goes back to your point, and I think the nail in the coffin right now for the Huskies, who they've got a week to turn this around. We're not done here, you know, and we've said that plenty of times in show history where we thought this Husky team was maybe dead to rights a little bit, and all of a sudden they did kind of scratch and claw with their backs against the wall. In years past, and say what you want about David Rennick, but we've seen, you know, Brett Larson's teams, and part of it is akin to just college hockey. They've had moments where they've had really poor defensive breakdowns. They've blown third period leads, things like that. Usually they've gotten that save. They've gotten that extra stop, and albeit not every night, but enough to where it was like if they had that breakdown in coverage, they got that extra save that they needed. A lot to ask from Isaac Posh in that situation. Yep. Not a lot to ask from Dominic Bassi. Sorry, not sorry. You know,
well, and a big reason why they have trended towards Isaac Posh here towards the last few weeks of the season, right? You know, when you talk about a coach and what he says, right? Sometimes, you know, when you're covering sports, a lot of what the coach just says are not in words, but with actions, right? Yep. And it's one of those things where, to me, and this goes back to the Western Michigan series just about a month ago, when he decided to go back-to-back with Posh. Mind you, before then, Dominic Bassi wasn't super sharp, right? Like, he wasn't terrible, but again, they were searching for that save, like you talked about, you know, that one extra stop that they needed just to kind of, like you said, not necessarily a game saver standing on his head, but sometimes you need that when you're hemmed in your own zone and you need to get that glove save to get a whistle, right? Just to essentially pause the action, just to sort of catch your breath. The Huskies haven't gotten that, and I think we need to say it. Posh is a freshman, right? I think he's answered the call to the best of his ability. He's getting good experience, and it wouldn't shock me if there was a decision in the coaching staff that says, you know what, Bassie's a senior. We don't know what his status is going to be, right? I think we're going with Posh because he is the future. He shows enough promise, and we're going to give him as many looks as we can going down the stretch, because right now he's playing better, and we feel like he's going to be the guy that's going to lead the team not only now but in the future.
Yeah, I would not be shocked to see maybe a little bit of, let's say, maybe Dominic Bassi on Friday, and then if they drop that first game on Friday, I mean, he's done. Or if the Huskies win Friday, they go back to Bassi on Saturday. If he plays on Friday, they lose on Saturday. Isaac Posh gets the call for that must win. So I think it's going to be interesting. We mentioned one more time, just a quick look at the pairwise. St. Cloud sitting at 16, Omaha, Western Michigan right above them. CC is actually above them. Interesting enough, Nick, 6 teams still technically in the top 16 out of 8 in the NCHC, which is, I think, a pretty wild thing to kind of mention as well, too. But nonetheless, the men are just simply going to have to figure it out. I don't even think this weekend, Nick, I don't even know if it really deserves any more preview, just in the sense of, like, Huskies got to win. That's it.
That's it.
Game over. Done. So
that's it.
And it's really, you and I were talking about this, Nick. We were thinking at least NCAA tournament, you know, for us, as far as our plan for, you know, as we close out our show and stuff. I'd really like to not have to scramble for extra content a little bit here or cover the NCAA tournament without the Huskies in it. Even a month and a half ago, I thought at some point this team would kind of turn around. They have not done it yet. Now there's no time for excuses. They've got to get it done. At minimum, they've got to at least make it to the Frozen Face-Off, and probably got to make it to the championship game to put themselves in an okay spot. St. Cloud's has basically the ability, and maybe not even, but at maximum, to be able to drop 1 of 3 games next weekend, and they've got to pretty much probably win from here on out, essentially, if they want to have a chance, so to speak. So, and they've made the next 5 weeks a very strong uphill battle, to say the least. Speaking of battles to be set here, Nick, we move over to the women's side here. The WCHA did crown a champion here. We did want to touch on this quickly. As Nick kind of alluded to and we talked about, oh, by the way, I guess we forgot to mention this before I kick it very quickly over to the women's side here. I suppose we did have a graphic. We should throw it up there. On the NCHC side of things, we do have the field set on the men's side. If you were curious for the other groupings, Miami will head to North Dakota, 8-1. Omaha in Colorado College at Ed Robeson. That's going to be a very interesting series. Omaha has been very good on the road. CC has been exceptional at home. Western travels to St. Cloud, and then Duluth will head to Denver. And then the teams will be reseeded on the men's side. So I suppose important to kind of just mention that very quickly. But on the women's side, on the WCHA side of things, we did have a champion in conference play. We had Duluth getting trounced by Ohio State 5-0. Not exactly a ton of surprise there. And then Wisconsin in overtime, Lacey Eden, game winner against the Minnesota Golden Gophers on their home ice technically. Then Wisconsin 6-3 was the final on Saturday against Ohio State, was 6-1 at one point before the tail end of that hockey game. And that kind of sealed the fate essentially for the WCHA and their conference play. And the WCHA does have representation from the top 4 teams in their grouping, so to speak, heading into the upcoming official bracket. You probably can't see quite a bit of that, so I'm going to do my best here as I cannot see the bottom half of this, but let's start here. Duluth, one of the final teams kind of on that outside little bracket. It's actually Duluth and UConn matching up. If you remember, UConn right above the Huskies in terms of the pairwise. The winner will actually get number 1 Ohio State, so we could see a bit of a rematch of that Friday night game we saw last weekend. Clarkson at 4 will have Minnesota at 5. Anybody's guess as to who comes out of that hockey game, to be honest with you. And then on the other side of the bracket, Cornell will face Stonehill. You mentioned that was probably the slot the Huskies were trying to squeak into. Winner will get number 3 Colgate, and then number 2 Wisconsin awaits the winner of St. Lawrence and Penn State. If you forget how the tournament works on the women's side, it's a little bit different. It was the conference auto bids for the 5 conferences, and then the 6 at-large teams beyond that, the next 6 best teams in the pairwise. The Huskies just missed that cut line, as Nick mentioned too. Winner of essentially Cornell versus Stonehill against Colgate. We'll have the winner of Wisconsin taking on either St. Lawrence or Penn State for a chance there. And then the Gophers and Clarkson play the winner of Ohio State and either Duluth or UConn. And then we continue to kind of roll through on the women's side, Nick. Just disappointing. I think that, the Huskies were not able to, be a part of that. But, all in all, a fairly decent season. Taking out essentially the WCHA play for the final week of the year and the championship games, are we really that surprised that Wisconsin has been red hot at the right time?
Again, when we talked about the WCHA, every single preseason, it's, the top 4, but at the end of it, I think one thing we underestimate, because I think we did pick Ohio State to win the Frozen Face-Off. I think we forget how good of a coach Mark Johnson is. Yeah. Just if there's one coach that, all the championships to his name, right, that I think just knows how to read the game, make the proper adjustments in game, and he's got the talent to be able to execute those small changes, right? Again, Ohio State with all the offense that they have, and that's a great team up and down. Again, they had got great goaltending this year, very mobile defense. But Wisconsin, again, they have a knack for the one and done games. I just have a know to just stick with the game plan, make the subtle adjustments if you need to, and be able to take these one and done games and really just feel comfortable in it. Right. Yep. So again, no surprise there. And for Wisconsin, again, going back, it's not that now do we look at them as the heavy favorite going into the NCAA tournament, but again, it shows that when you put essentially half of your conference into an 11-team playoff run, the WCHA, you mentioned, well represented, and the Gophers, man, I know they're vulnerable, but you can't necessarily count them out either. They've done it too, and mind you, it's been a little while. But that's what's great about the WCHA. And one thing about this Huskies run on the women's side that's been frustrating too, but we have to remember these are the competition that they're trying to face, right? The top 4. It's not an easy challenge. And mind you, for the women's team, they were ranked, I think, every single week, even in the preseason, despite their second half, shall I say, blunders in the win-loss schedule. that in itself shows you that they're getting noticed. There's some respect going around with the St. Cloud State Huskies. Again, we talked about the differences in how they're approaching the game, more offensive pushback. So again, although the win-loss record not necessarily showing much improvement. Again, if you've watched the last 2 years, you can see the steps being taken by this program. I think now, can they put it together, right? Can they put a full season together? Can they get a little bit more scoring depth? I think they also need to get some help defensively. But I think the big question, I want to put you to this, is their goaltending. I think they're losing both Ahola and Schoback, if I recall correctly. Don't know for sure. Paige is it Hogendam, I think, is the redshirt freshman that would essentially have some time if those two don't return. But yeah, Huskies also losing a lot of veterans, and it's going to be sad to see a couple of these folks go because they were really the driving force behind really the last 2 years and the changes that were put under Brian Idalski.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember here. Somehow that they're both seniors. So I'm trying to remember, do they have COVID eligibility? I think this is the last group that has COVID eligibility. Is that not?
I'm trying to remember.
Because on the men's side, it is like it's Vieti Mietinen's senior year. So I think they are both eligible for their fifth. But yeah, beyond that, this team's going to look much different next year. I think that's kind of the piece that we need to pull out of this is, in front of whoever is in net, it's going to look a lot different, and the Huskies are going to have to try to do it a different way. I think if you would have went back to the beginning of the season, even with hopeful expectations, and said, hey, you were going to be essentially probably one of the last teams or two that was going to be at that cut line, heading into the NCAA tournament, even with a really poor second half, still a lot to really be happy about for this St. Cloud's women's team. And, as much as I thought we were going to talk about them a little bit more this week, because I thought the men were going to take care of business a little bit easier this weekend. Newsflash, that didn't happen. We still have a lot of fun, exciting statistical things to talk about this women's team that I think we're going to continue to kind of push off a little bit, just because the men have been so perplexing a little bit, and we might not be talking about them for much longer unless they can figure things out. But you look at the NCAA field in general, the strength of the WCHA, we've talked about that as well too. Playing in a very challenging conference are the Huskies on top of that, so it doesn't help them. It doesn't hurt them, but it also doesn't help them that when you lose 3 or 4 in a row, the likelihood is when you come back the following weekend, you're probably not going to get an opponent that maybe if you're playing in a different conference like Hockey East and you were a high-end team, you might be able to roll over a couple of opponents and string 4 or 5 together, for example. You look at the field for the tournament, 3 of the 4 WCHA teams are all on the same side. So the Gophers have to escape against Clarkson. Duluth has to even buy themselves a chance against Ohio State, which is the number 1 team in the country. Winners of both those games could get each other. We could still see if Wisconsin takes care of business as the number 2 seed on the other side. We could see a rematch of last year's national championship game. Ohio State and Wisconsin could meet up once again. In fact, if I was a betting man, I would probably put a fair amount of cash on that, because I just feel like both those two teams are just kind of on another level. I still think, even with the result of the WCHA championship last weekend, I still think Ohio State gets it done. I think it's going to take them a little bit. It's going to be a little bit hairy, but I think they're going to finally find their way through the thick of things and finally solve Wisconsin in the national championship game. We obviously had our predictions mid-season, so we'll talk about those in a couple of weeks as well too. But yeah, this weekend, women's NCAA tournament, all the quarterfinals and semifinals get back in action. And then, of course, over the next couple of weeks, I want to say March 22nd, if that sounds right. I think
Friday. Yeah. 2 weeks is going to be the frozen face-off for the NCHC.
Yep. So, not the NCHC, sorry, the Final Four for the Frozen Four.
Oh, yeah.
For the women's side
for the
of
women,
things.
Yeah.
But you are also correct. The Frozen Face-Off is also
happening all at the same time.
Yeah. Who would have thunk? A lot of hockey happening at the same moment. On the men's side, of course, March 15th through the 17th, it's upcoming weekend. They host Western Michigan. It is 3 versus 6 for the 15, 14, and 5 St. Cloud State Huskies, who need every bit of those essentially 60 minutes plus each night in order to try to punch their ticket to an NCAA tournament themselves. Both teams this year on the cusp, on the outside looking in the NCAA tournament. The women's team, it did not pan out. The men's team in dire straits, hanging on by a thread as they head into the NCHC quarterfinals and the playoffs. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.